In our few moments here together, I want us to think about some of the eye-opening statements in the Bible. There's a lot. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 21, we have an eye-opening statement within the conversation Jesus has with the rich young ruler. We also have another eye-opening statement in Romans chapter 9, where Paul talks about his concern for those who are lost, his concern for those who are separated from Christ. And what we see Paul say here, it always grabs my attention for somebody to have this much passion about those who are separated from Christ. Colossians chapter 1, verse 23 also falls into this category. As Paul writes to Christians, he encourages them to stay faithful. And there's one word in particular in this verse that always grabs my attention, that word if. We have to stay faithful. We have to continue walking with God. 2 Corinthians 5:10 is another one of these statements concerning us standing before God on the judgment day. Hebrews 9 is another one of these types of verses. And then finally here in Matthew chapter 16. I want us to take a few minutes to think about what Jesus says here in Matthew 16. In verse 26, Jesus, he makes this statement, "What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul?" Have you ever thought to yourself, my life is really going well? Have you ever had a thought like that? If you've had that thought, and probably you've had at one point or another, what contributed to that thinking? What made you have that thought? Things really seem to be going well for me right now. Things seem to be just going great. It's easy for us to have that thought when things are working in our favor physically, financially, if things are good, if we have a good health report, maybe we get a promotion at work, maybe our relationships here in this life just seem to be going really smooth. But what if we don't have those things? What if we're struggling financially? What if we don't get a good health report? What if we don't get that promotion at work? What if our relationships here in this life just seem to be not going well? What if we gained the entire world? That's what Jesus is talking about here. What if we had everything this world had to offer? What thoughts would you have to yourself if you had all of the money, all of the land, if your health was amazing, you were the perfect picture of health, all of your relationships are just going really, what if you had everything this world had to offer? What thoughts would you have? What if you had all of that, but you were distant from God? Would you still be happy? What if it was the opposite? What if you were close to God? What if you were connected with Him? What if you had a powerhouse relationship with your Heavenly Father? You were in the right place. You were in a saved condition, but you didn't have anything else the world had to offer. What if you were like Job, where everything is stripped from you in a physical sense, but you still had God? If you look at those two extreme situations, having nothing physically but having God, and you compare and contrast that with the opposite place, in which one of those positions would you consider yourself blessed? In which one of those places would you think to yourself, wow, things are really going well for me right now? 1 acre of land sells for a lot of money, especially if it's in the right place. What if you owned all the land? How much is 1 bar of gold worth? A year or so ago at Costco, they were selling bars of gold. It was amazing, the response. People pouring in, people trying to order them online. What if you owned all of the world's gold? What if you had all of Warren Buffett's money? He recently retired. Everybody was in an uproar. I'm like, the dude's in his 90s. Let him retire. What if you had all of his money? What if you had all of Bill Gates' money? What if you had everything this world had to offer physically? Do you realize all of that, all of the land, all of the gold, all of the money, all of the power, all of the fame, all of the popularity, that would still pale in comparison to the value of your soul, to the value of one soul? As you listen to the ministry opportunities presented over the next several weeks, these are ministries that touch on eternity. These are ministries that take involvement, take time, take effort, take energy. They take an investment on our part. Do we realize the value of what we're investing in? What Jesus says here in Matthew chapter 16, this is an eye-opening statement. It falls in line with many of these other verses that I briefly shared. These words should get our attention. They should channel our lives in a certain direction. These are soul-searching type questions. And you know who else is thinking about these questions that Jesus asks? Our enemy, Satan. What Jesus presents to us here really is what our life is going to center on. These are questions we have to consider to determine the course of your life, and the answers to these questions here will determine how you live. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Your answer to that question will determine a lot about your existence. What will a man give in exchange for his soul? These are big questions. Eternal questions. Anything that touches on eternity is a major concern to our Savior. But anything that touches on eternity is also of major concern to our enemy, to Satan. Because Satan wants to find out where we're at. He wants to evaluate us. He's going to test us continually to try and find where we stand. As a parent, you try to find strategies that work best for each of your children. When it comes to discipline, when it comes to motivation, when it comes to talking to them, every child is different. As a teacher, if you're in education, you try to find the teaching methods that will help each individual student learn. Shannon works in special education, and especially in that area, everything is geared to the individual, trying to help that individual student learn the best ways they can. This is how Satan operates. Individually, he targets us. Our adversary is continually thinking, continually plotting, continually scheming. In his game plan, it centers around these words from Jesus. What will she take in exchange for her soul? What will he trade for his soul? And every day the question is presented to us anew. Every day Satan is throwing this at us, throwing things at us to see if that will get our attention, if that particular thing is more important to us than our relationship with God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul, he talks about temporary things versus those matters that are eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For indeed in this house we groan, longing to be clothed with our dwelling from heaven, inasmuch as we, having put it on, will not be found naked. For indeed, while we are in this tent, we groan, being burdened, because we do not want to be unclothed, but to be clothed, so that what is mortal will be swallowed up by life. I think too often we have the I want it all mentality. We want everything. We want everything the world has to offer, but we also want closeness with God. We want all the money. We want all the stuff. We want all the fame. We want all the glory. We want all the popularity, but we also want God. What if you had to choose one or the other? Actually, I'll just present it this way. You do have to choose. You have to choose what's most important. You have to choose what's going to be the center of your life. You have to choose what you're going to pursue, what's going to take center place in your life. Do you realize that even if you had it all, it would all eventually perish? Even if you had it all, it wouldn't satisfy. And we see both sides today. We see both sides in the Bible. The preacher in Ecclesiastes stands in stark contrast to Moses. The preacher grew weary of acquiring. He had pretty much everything the world had to offer. But still he grew tired. He grew weary. Even though he had all of this stuff. That's in many ways a picture of Israel in the Promised Land. A picture of many of us today. You can have it all and still be left wanting. You can be rich financially and still feel empty. You can have power and fame and glory and still have a big void in your life. Moses, interesting situation he found himself in. He had the world laid at his doorstep. He could have had it all in terms of physical things. Money, power, fame, fortune. Many people think, what else is there to life? If I get all of that, then I have everything I need. I have everything I want. Well, there's that what else that we need to consider. If you had everything this world had to offer, there's still something else that's left out there. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. I want you to notice some of the action words here in these verses. Notice the choices, the thinking of Moses. And it was all based on his faith. Moses' faith in God dictated how he lived. Moses' faith in God, now think about this, it determined the choices that he made. It plotted the path of his life in front of him. It was by faith that Moses lived. He chose God over everything the world could offer him. In Egypt, wow, it had a lot to offer Moses at that time. By faith, he chose God. He considered, he thought about things from an eternal perspective. He wasn't caught up in the here and now. He wasn't caught up in the physical realm, the physical world that so often dominates our lives. So he thought about this. He considered things. We need to consider what Jesus says in Matthew 16. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits or loses his soul? What will a man give in exchange for his soul? We need to consider that. We need to think about it. And we need to allow our faith in God to drive our decisions. By faith, Moses considered some things. He wasn't thinking in terms of this world. He wasn't thinking in terms of his bank account. He wasn't thinking in terms of how great all of that gold and power would be in Egypt. He was thinking about his soul. He was thinking about his connection to God. Moses was more concerned about God than he was stuff. He was more concerned about God than he was money. More concerned about God than he was power. At some point, every one of us here will be concerned about God. Every atheist at some point will be concerned about God. Every agnostic, every skeptic, at some point, they'll have concern for God. At some point, you will be concerned about your soul. There is a point coming in the future when those questions that Jesus asked in Matthew 16, They'll be so easy for you to answer. When we're standing before God on the judgment day, imagine God asking us, what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? At that particular moment, that question is pretty easy to answer, isn't it? Imagine we're standing before God on the judgment day, and he asked us, what will you give in exchange for your soul? Wow, I can answer that question in that place and that time very easy. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is a moment in time coming in the future when you will see the answers to those questions with 100% clarity. We need that vision now. So often, talk to parents just a minute. We offer up our kids on the altar of prosperity, chasing after more stuff, living such a hectic life, there's no time for God. Other times we offer up our children on the altar of sports glory, athletic success. It's amazing the time, the money, the effort we put into some of those things, where God takes such a tiny, 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 tiny place in our lives. There will come a time, even probably before the judgment day, when you'll be able to look in that rearview mirror and say, wow, I should have done some things differently. Should have prioritized some things differently in my home. For those of you who have kids in your home right now, do it now. Don't wait. In our class this morning, we talked about the kings of the northern kingdom. 19 kings, 19 wicked kings. And we saw the influence of those kings and their families. The influence of those kings on an entire nation. You have influence. I'm not talking about on a national level. I just want you to think about your home. You have influence in your home. In the answers that you make to these questions, the answers that you give Jesus, the answers that you live out in your life, think about the two questions. What will it profit a man if he gains the entire world and loses his soul? Your answer to that question, and your answer to this question, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Your answer to those questions will not only affect you, they're going to affect your home. They're going to affect your children. They're going to affect people around you, because people know the answers from you based on how you live. You see, we answer those questions not so much with our words, because we know the answers. We know the right answers. If it was a test that Jesus was just giving us, all we had to do is write the answer down. We'd pass flying colors. You don't answer that type of test with just words on a paper. You answer that test with your life, how you live, the choices that you make. At some point, you will be concerned about your soul. Don't believe me? Just listen to this. A man cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue. For I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things. You had all the stuff the world had to offer. And likewise, Lazarus, bad things. We have two men in that exact situation I described. One who had nothing physically but had God. One who had everything physically but wasn't concerned about God. Now Lazarus is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great chasm that is fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, in order that he may warn them, so they will not also come to this place of torment. When we see the flashing lights in the rearview mirror, We're instantly concerned about traffic laws, aren't we? Instantly. What was I doing? Blinker, speeding. What did I do? For riding someone too close. What did I do? Did I run a red light? At that point, it's too late. The rich man, he was concerned for souls, right? It was just too late. Right now, for you, for me, it's not too late. What will it profit a man if he gains the entire world, everything, but loses his soul? What will a man give in exchange for his soul? What will your answers be? If we can help you in any way this morning, we invite you to come as we stand and sing together.